I remember exactly where I was standing when Richard said those words. It was at his annual spring dinner, the one where he celebrates his grandchildren's academic achievements. The Wilson family tradition. Crystal glasses, polished silverware, those stiff-backed dining chairs that make you sit up straight whether you want to or not. Everyone was laughing, drinking, celebrating my niece Jessica's early acceptance to Princeton. And Richard, in his tailored navy blazer with the gold buttons, lifted his glass and toasted to the brilliant minds carrying the Wilson legacy forward. He always says things like that. The Wilson legacy. As if we're some kind of dynasty, not just an upper-middle-class family in Connecticut who take themselves too seriously at formal dinners. I was passing the potatoes, smiling. That's my role in this family, the smiler, the nodder, the outsider who doesn't cause trouble. My son Ethan was beside me, quiet, polite, trying to disappear into his button-down shirt that was just slightly too big at the collar. I was genuinely happy for Jessica, but I couldn't stop my mind from wandering. Ethan is just as bright, maybe brighter, in ways that don't show up on standardized tests. He reads philosophy for fun. He writes stories that make me cry. He works at the library after school and still manages to help me manage my medications and breathing treatments for my asthma. He didn't have private SAT tutors or college counselors. He had grit. He had me. That's when Richard looked down the table at Ethan and said, "So, what are your grades looking like these days, Ethan? Still struggling with those science classes?" His voice wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. It was casual, conversational, as if he were asking about the weather. Ethan stiffened beside me, his fork hovering above his barely touched salmon. "There, better this semester," he said quietly. "I got a B+ in chemistry." Richard nodded, taking a deliberate sip of his wine. "Well, not everyone is cut out for academics. Maybe a technical school would be more appropriate. There's dignity in skilled trades." The table went quiet. Susan, Richard's wife, placed her hand on his arm, but he continued. "The Wilson Education Fund is for those who will make the most of prestigious opportunities. Why waste it on someone who might not succeed?" That moment it did something to me. Not because I hadn't heard worse. I had. Not because Ethan hadn't been excluded before. He had. But something about how matter-of-fact it was. The way he said it like it was a kindness, a practical consideration, not a judgment. It cracked something I'd been holding together for 17 years. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just smiled and said nothing, the way I always do. But inside, I was burning. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ethan had secrets. Secrets that would shake the foundations of the Wilson family legacy. And when those secrets came to light, even Richard, the man who once told me I was a distraction to his son before he died, would be forced to see Ethan for who he truly was. This is the story of how my quiet, thoughtful, underestimated son showed the world and his grandfather exactly what he was made of. This is the story of 3 generations of writers, of dreams crushed and reborn, and of what happens when the silenced finally find their voice. Our apartment always feels smaller after we've been to Richard's house. The ceiling lower, the walls closer, the furniture more worn. But it's home. It's ours. That night, after the dinner, Ethan went straight to his room while I made tea in our tiny kitchen. The whistle of the kettle couldn't drown out my thoughts. I teach art at Westfield High. Or I did. Budget cuts were coming, and arts programs are always the first to go. The letter sat on my counter, still unopened, though I knew what it said. Without my teaching position, we'd struggle to make rent. We'd struggle even more with my medical bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard managed a healthcare investment firm while his daughter-in-law could barely afford her inhaler. I knocked on Ethan's door with 2 mugs of tea. No answer. I pushed it open gently and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by torn pages covered in his neat handwriting. His eyes were red, though he quickly wiped them when he saw me. "Hey, honey. You okay?" He nodded, gathering the papers. "Just sorting through some old stuff." I handed him the tea and sat on the edge of his bed. "You know what your grandfather said isn't true, right? About you not being cut out for academics. Isn't it, though?" His voice was small. "My grades aren't like Jessica's or Tyler's. I'm not getting early acceptance anywhere." I reached for one of the torn pages. "May I?" He hesitated, then nodded. The page contained a story, something about a man watching his dreams sold off piece by piece. The writing was beautiful, haunting. Nothing like what you'd expect from a 17-year-old. "This is incredible, Ethan." He shrugged. "It's just something I was working on for Ms. Torres' class." Ms. Torres, the new English teacher who'd taken such an interest in Ethan's writing. The one who'd stayed after school with him for weeks, working on what she called his portfolio. "Ethan," I said carefully, "what happened to your father? It wasn't your fault. You know that, right?" His eyes snapped to mine, startled. "We rarely talked about James. About how he'd smiled at us over breakfast one morning and jumped from the Carlton Bridge that evening. About the manuscript the police found in his car, rejected for the 11th time. About how Richard had called his son's passion a waste of potential at the funeral." "I know, Mom." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "I just sometimes wonder if Grandpa's right. Maybe pursuing writing is impractical." I put my hand over his. "Your father's tragedy wasn't that he wrote. It was that he believed the only way to be valuable was to be published, to be validated by others." I squeezed his fingers. "Don't let anyone define your worth that way. Especially not Richard." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't read, something determined and secretive and sad all at once. I didn't know then what he was hiding. I didn't know about the contests he'd entered under a pen name, or the online community of young writers who admired his work. I didn't know about Ms. Torres' past connection to Richard, or the decades-old manuscripts gathering dust in Richard's study. I didn't know that the pages scattered around Ethan's room that night were the beginning of something that would change all our lives. I just knew my son was hurting, and that I would do anything to help him find his voice. The first time I met Alexandra Torres was at a parent-teacher conference in October. She wasn't what I expected. Confident, stylishly dressed, with the sharp eyes of someone who notices everything. She talked about Ethan like she actually knew him. "Your son has extraordinary talent, Ms. Reynolds. His writing shows a maturity and depth I rarely see, even in college students." I smiled, used to teachers being kind. "He's always loved books. This is more than enjoying literature." She leaned forward. "I've submitted one of his stories to the Bennington Young Writers competition." "With his permission, of course." My eyebrows shot up. That's a big deal." "It is." She hesitated. "There's something else. I've encouraged him to use a pen name." "A pen name? Why?" Her expression changed, just slightly. "Sometimes it helps to separate the writer from expectations. To let the work stand on its own." Something in her tone made me pause. "Do you know my father-in-law? Richard Wilson." The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders stiffened. "We've crossed paths," she said carefully. "In another life, I was a junior editor at Harcourt Publishing." The pieces clicked. "Richard's investment group acquired them years ago." She nodded once. "They made changes to the editorial direction. Many projects were dropped. Many careers affected. Including hers, I guessed. Including, perhaps, others." "Does Ethan know about this connection?" "No," she said firmly. "And I'd prefer to keep it that way. My interest in his talent is genuine, Ms. Reynolds. Whatever history exists between me and his grandfather has nothing to do with that." I believed her. Mostly. But as I left her classroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was being drawn into a story that began long before he was born. That night, I searched through my old boxes until I found a photo from James and my wedding. In the background, partially cropped, a younger Richard stood with a woman in a dark green dress. Looking closer, I realized with a start that it was Alexandra Torres, 20 years younger, but unmistakable. "What are you looking for?" I jumped. Ethan stood in the doorway of my bedroom, watching me surrounded by old photographs. "Just reminiscing," I said, sliding the photo under others. "How was the library?" "Fine." He hesitated. "Mom, if I tell you something, will you promise not to make a big deal about it?" My heart skipped. "Of course." He sat beside me on the floor. "I've been applying to colleges for creative writing programs. I tried to keep my expression neutral." "That's wonderful." "Why would I make a big deal?" "Because they're selective schools. Schools Grandpa would say I have no business applying to." He took a deep breath. "And because I've been using a pen name for my applications. E.W. Reynolds. E.W. Reynolds." The name Ms. Torres had suggested. The name that would soon bring everything past and present, secrets and legacies crashing together. Susan Wilson called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was grading projects. Her voice was tense, hushed, as if she was afraid of being overheard. "Morgan, I need to speak with you. Privately. Can you meet me at the cafe on Elm Street?" 4:00. In 15 years of being part of the Wilson family, Susan had never once asked to meet me alone. The cafe was quiet. Susan sat in a corner booth, her perfect posture and pearl earrings at odds with her nervous expression. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I found something I think you should see." She placed a manila folder on the table and pushed it toward me. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers, typewritten pages, marked with handwritten notes. "What is this?" I asked, though something in me already knew. "Richard's manuscript," she said quietly. "From before we were married. Before he took over his father's company." I scanned the first page. "The Price of Silence" by Richard Wilson. The date was from nearly 40 years ago. He was a writer? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Susan's smile was sad. "A brilliant one." This was his second novel. His first won a small award, caught the attention of some publishers in New York. "What happened?" "His father happened." She stirred her untouched tea. "Richard was given a choice: take over the family business or be cut off completely. This manuscript was his last act of rebellion. He submitted it to publishers while working at his father's company." "And it was rejected?" Susan's eyes met mine. "It was accepted. By a small but respected press. The editor who championed it was Alexandra Torres." The room seemed to tilt. "Miss Torres?" "Ethan's teacher. She was just starting her career. The publication would have been a coup for her too." Susan took a shaky breath. "But Richard's father found out. He leveraged his connections, threatened to pull investments. The offer was rescinded. And Richard gave up writing." Susan nodded. "He became exactly what his father wanted. Practical. Successful. Bitter." She pushed the folder closer to me. "Richard doesn't know I kept this. He thinks he burned every copy." I stared at the manuscript, my mind racing. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because history is repeating itself." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard sees himself in Ethan the dreamer, the writer. And it terrifies him." "So he tears Ethan down? How does that help?" "He thinks he's protecting him from disappointment. From what happened to James." Her eyes filled with tears. "He's offered Ethan an internship at the company this summer, with a promise of a full college fund if he majors in business or economics." The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. The dinner, the comments about technical school, the dismissal of Ethan's improvements. He's trying to force Ethan away from writing. Susan reached across the table and gripped my hand. Morgan, there's something else you should know. Something about James's manuscript. My blood went cold. What about it? The one the police found in his car wasn't the first. Richard rejected others. Said they weren't good enough. Said James needed to focus on practical skills. Her voice broke. I never forgave myself for not speaking up, for not stopping it. I sat back, stunned. 3 generations Richard, James, and now Ethan, all with the same creative spirit. All crushed under the weight of practicality and the Wilson legacy. What do you want me to do with this information? I asked finally. Susan straightened, suddenly resolute. I want you to help break the cycle. I want you to make sure Ethan doesn't become Richard. Or James. As I left the cafe with Richard's manuscript tucked into my bag, I felt like I was carrying dynamite. I didn't yet know how right that feeling was. The name E.W. Reynolds began appearing on literary blogs in January. A story about a young man rebuilding his grandfather's boat won an online contest. Another about a family dinner where no one speaks the truth was published in a small literary journal. The pieces were good, hauntingly good, and they caught people's attention. They caught Richard's attention. Have you seen this? He asked one Sunday when we were invited for lunch. He passed his tablet across the table, showing a literary website featuring a story by E.W. Reynolds. Remarkable talent for someone so young. I nearly choked on my water. Across the table, Ethan studied his plate with intense concentration. You follow literary journals, Dad? Susan asked, her voice carefully casual. Richard looked almost embarrassed. I keep an eye on emerging writers. For investment purposes, of course. Publishing houses are always looking for the next big talent. Ethan's eyes flicked up, then back to his food. What do you like about this writer's work? Susan pressed. Richard scrolled through the tablet. There's an authenticity to it, a maturity beyond their years. He looked up suddenly, his gaze landing on Ethan. You're interested in writing, aren't you, Ethan? You should read this. Learn from it. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. Ethan mumbled something about checking it out later, and the conversation moved on. Later that week, I found Ethan reading Richard's manuscript in his room. I'd left it on my dresser, not yet ready to tell him about it. He'd found it anyway. Mom, he said, his voice strained, did you know about this? I sat beside him on the bed. I just found out myself. Susan gave it to me. It's good, he whispered. Really good. The protagonist sounds like Dad. My heart ached. I think your father and grandfather were more alike than either wanted to admit. Ethan flipped through the pages. There are themes here about expectation and identity that I've been exploring in my own writing. He looked up at me, his eyes conflicted. Is that weird? That I'm drawn to the same ideas as Grandpa, even though we're so different. It's not weird, I said. It's legacy. The real kind. Not the one Richard talks about at dinner parties. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Ms. Torres wants me to submit a portfolio to Northwestern's creative writing program. She says I have a chance at a scholarship. My chest tightened. Northwestern was one of the top programs in the country. That's amazing, honey. But if Grandpa finds out... He trailed off. Listen to me. I took his face in my hands. You are not responsible for Richard's feelings. You are not responsible for his regrets. And you are definitely not responsible for what happened to your father. He nodded, but I could see the weight on his shoulders. The weight of expectations, of fear, of a legacy of silenced voices. Little did I know that the manuscript in his hands would soon become a ticking time bomb in our lives. The explosion came on a rainy Thursday in March. I was making dinner when the door slammed open, rain and fury blowing in with equal force. Richard stood in my doorway, soaking wet, his face contorted with anger I'd never seen before. Where is he? He demanded. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, trying to stay calm. Richard, what's going on? E.W. Reynolds, he spat. Did you know? Did you know what he was doing? My stomach dropped. Ethan's at the library. He'll be home soon. Why don't you sit down and... Don't patronize me, Morgan. He paced my small living room. Alexandra Torres. Of all people. She put him up to this, didn't she? Put him up to what, exactly? Writing? Using a pen name? Those are his choices, Richard. Using my stories, he shouted. My themes, my characters, He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd revealed. Your stories, I said quietly. So you've read his work carefully enough to see the similarities. He ran a hand through his wet hair. That's not the point, isn't it? You recognized your own voice in his. That should make you proud. Proud? He laughed bitterly. He's living in a fantasy world, just like his father was. And you're encouraging it, just like you encouraged James. The accusation hit like a slap. Don't you dare blame me for what happened to James. Your son died because he believed he wasn't good enough. Because nothing he did ever measured up to the great Richard Wilson's expectations. Richard flinched as if I'd struck him. I was trying to protect him. By crushing his dreams? By making him feel worthless. By preparing him for reality. Richard's voice cracked. Writing is a path to disappointment. To poverty. To obscurity. For you, maybe, I said. But that doesn't mean it will be for Ethan. The front door opened. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor, staring at his grandfather. Ethan, Richard said, his voice suddenly controlled. We need to talk. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. You found out that you've been publishing stories under a fake name? That you've been working with the woman who sabotaged my publishing deal 40 years ago? Yes, I found out. Ethan's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Miss Torres is my English teacher. She's a failed editor who couldn't protect her authors, Richard snapped. And now she's using you to get back at me. That's not true, Ethan said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. She believes in my writing. She's the only one who ever has. The hurt that flashed across Richard's face was genuine. I read your stories, Ethan. Every single one E.W. Reynolds published. Do you know what I saw in them? Ethan's chin lifted. Enlighten me. I saw myself. I saw James. I saw the same obsessions, the same questions. Richard's voice grew quieter. And I saw real talent. The kind that makes people take notice. Surprise flickered across Ethan's face. You liked them. That's irrelevant, Richard said stiffly. What matters is what happens next. Northwestern's writing program isn't practical. It won't lead to a stable career. You don't know that. I do know that. I've lived it. Richard's eyes were intense. I'm offering you something better. A summer internship at Wilson Healthcare. A full ride to any business school you're accepted to. Real opportunities, Ethan. In exchange for giving up writing, Ethan said flatly. Richard shook his head. You can write all you want as a hobby, not as a career path. I stepped forward. Richard, you can't. Stay out of this, Morgan, he snapped. I'm trying to save your son from making the same mistakes his father made. The same mistakes I made. By forcing him to make your father's mistakes instead? I countered. Richard turned back to Ethan. I'm not the villain here. I'm offering you security. A future without struggle. What about Mom's future? Ethan asked quietly. You know her teaching position is being cut. You know she needs her health insurance for her asthma treatments. Richard's expression hardened. That's why I'm including a stipend for your mother in my offer. Enough to cover her medical expenses as long as you hold up your end of the bargain. The manipulation was so blatant, so cruel, I could barely breathe. He was using my health as leverage against my own son. Ethan looked at me, conflict written across his face. Don't you dare consider it, I said. We'll figure something out. We always do. You have until the graduation dinner to decide, Richard said, moving toward the door. Choose wisely, Ethan. After he left, Ethan and I stood in silence, the sound of rain the only thing breaking the quiet. "I'll take his offer," Ethan finally said. "For your sake." "Absolutely not." I gripped his shoulders. "Listen to me. Your writing isn't just good, Ethan. It's important. It's healing. I've read every word E.W. Reynolds has published, and do you know what I see in those stories?" He shook his head. "I see hope. I see someone making sense of pain. I see someone building bridges between generations." My voice caught. "I see someone who could save others like your father. Like your grandfather. But your health is not your responsibility." I pulled him into a hug. "The world needs your voice, Ethan. Not another businessman in a suit, dying inside with every meeting, every compromise, every abandoned dream." What I didn't tell him was what I planned to do next: to find Alexandra Torres and learn the whole truth about her history with the Wilson men. To understand the real story behind 3 generations of silenced writers. The truth, when it finally emerged, wasn't what any of us expected. Alexandra Torres hadn't been fired because of Richard's manuscript. She'd left Harcourt voluntarily to try to help James publish his work elsewhere. She'd recognized the same talent in the son that she'd seen in the father, and she'd tried to nurture it away from Richard's influence. "I failed him," she told me as we sat in her classroom after school. "I couldn't find a publisher willing to take a chance on his novel. It was good, but it needed work he wouldn't do because he was so desperate for his father's approval." "And now you're trying again with Ethan," I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. She nodded. "But it's different this time. Ethan writes for himself, not for validation. His work has an authenticity James has lacked. And using Richard's themes, his character archetypes? Was that your idea?" She looked surprised. "That was all Ethan. I didn't even know about Richard's writing past until recently." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Ethan's been accepted to Northwestern. Full scholarship." My breath caught. "When did this happen?" "The letter came yesterday. He asked me not to tell you yet." "He's conflicted." Of course he was. Richard's offer hung over him, security for both of us versus pursuing his dream. The same choice Richard had faced with his father. The same pressure James had buckled under. "The graduation dinner is tomorrow night," I said quietly. "Richard expects Ethan's answer then." "What will he choose?" she asked. I wished I knew. The Wilson home was lit up like a Christmas display for the graduation dinner. Crystal chandeliers, silver balloons, a banner congratulating the graduating seniors. Richard stood at the head of the table, Susan beside him, as family members filled the dining room. Ethan and I arrived last. He wore a suit I'd found at a consignment shop, altered to fit his tall, lanky frame. He looked older somehow. Resolved. "Ah, the man of the hour," Richard called as we entered. "Ethan, come sit by me. We have much to discuss." Dinner proceeded with excruciating slowness. Richard announced each grandchild's college plans with elaborate pride: Jessica to Princeton, Tyler to Duke, Megan to Vanderbilt. Then he turned to Ethan, his smile tight. "And Ethan will be joining the Wilson healthcare team this summer before heading to business school. A practical choice for a practical young man." My heart sank. Had Ethan already accepted? Had he made this decision without telling me? Ethan cleared his throat. "Actually, Grandpa, I haven't agreed to that yet." The table went quiet. Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Perhaps now would be a good time to formalize our arrangement." "I have a counter-proposal," Ethan said calmly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "I'd like to read something first, if that's okay." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Ethan unfolded the paper. "This is an excerpt from a story I've been working on. It's called 3 Voices." He began to read. The prose was beautiful, flowing between 3 distinct voices and perspectives. An older man looking back on his abandoned dreams. A middle-aged man drowning in expectations. A young man searching for his place in a legacy of silence. It wove together themes from Richard's manuscript, echoes of James's work that I recognized from the pages the police had found, and Ethan's own unique voice. As he read, I watched Richard's face. The anger, the recognition, the pain, and finally, something else, something that looked almost like awe. When Ethan finished, the room was utterly silent. That was quite something, Richard finally said, his voice strained. But sentimentality doesn't change reality, Ethan. Creative writing programs don't lead to stable careers. Maybe not, Susan said suddenly. Every head turned toward her. But they can lead to publishing deals. She slid an envelope across the table to Ethan. He opened it, his eyes widening as he read. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "A letter from Blackwood Press," Susan said, offering to publish Ethan's collection of short stories, the ones he wrote as E.W. Reynolds. She looked directly at her husband. "The ones you said showed remarkable talent." Richard's face drained of color. "You did this?" "Behind my back. I did what you couldn't do, Richard. I broke the cycle." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I sent Ethan's manuscript to publishers because I couldn't bear to watch another generation of Wilson men suffocate their gifts." Richard stood abruptly. "This discussion is over. Ethan, you have a choice to make. Security or fantasy. Choose now." Ethan stood too, matching his grandfather's height for the first time I could remember. "I already have." He pulled another letter from his jacket. "I've been accepted to Northwestern's creative writing program. With a full scholarship." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Richard's face flushed dark red. "And," Ethan continued, "I've also been accepted to Northwestern's business school. I plan to double major." Richard blinked. "Double major? In creative writing and business." Ethan nodded. "Because someday, I want to start a publishing house. One that values new voices. One that doesn't silence dreams for the sake of practicality." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Ethan wasn't choosing between Richard's path and James's path. He was forging his own one that honored both legacies while breaking free of their limitations. Without another word, Richard walked out of the dining room. The silence he left behind was deafening. "Go to him," I whispered to Ethan. "This is your moment to break the cycle." Completely. I found them in Richard's study 20 minutes later. They sat across from each other, Richard behind his desk, Ethan in the visitor's chair. Between them lay 3 manuscripts, Richard's yellowed pages, a printed copy of James's final work, and Ethan's stories. "Never meant to hurt him," Richard was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I was saving him from disappointment." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "But you can't protect someone by breaking them first." Richard looked up as I entered. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usual perfect composure shattered. "Morgan," he said, "did you know? All this time." I shook my head. "I've been discovering the pieces along with everyone else." He ran a hand over his face. "I've made so many mistakes." "Yes," I agreed, sitting beside Ethan. "But you have a chance to do better now." Richard looked at the 3 manuscripts on his desk. 3 generations of Wilson writers. My father would be appalled. "Good," said Ethan with the ghost of a smile. A strange sound escaped Richard, something between a laugh and a sob. "I read your stories, you know. Not just the published ones. The ones Torres showed me. They're better than mine ever were. Better than James's too." He swallowed hard. "You have something we didn't have, Ethan." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Freedom." Richard's eyes met mine briefly. "Your mother gave you that. She never tried to make you into something you weren't." I felt tears threatening. I just wanted him to be himself. Richard nodded slowly. "I'd like to make a new proposal. He straightened in his chair. The Wilson Family Literary Foundation. To support young writers from challenging backgrounds. With you, Ethan, as its first recipient and eventual director. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you serious? Completely. And Richard hesitated, looking suddenly vulnerable. I'd like to publish my old manuscript alongside your collection. And James's work too. The three Wilson men, finally speaking together. The symbolism was perfect. 3 generations healing through words. Through finally being heard. I'd like that, Ethan said softly. I think Dad would too. Later that night, as Ethan and I drove home in comfortable silence, I realized something profound had shifted. The weight Ethan had carried for years, the weight of living up to expectations while staying true to himself, the weight of his father's tragedy seemed lighter somehow. You know, I said as we pulled into our apartment complex, your grandfather isn't the only one who's proud of you. I've always seen who you really are, Ethan. He smiled a real smile without shadows. I know, Mom. You're the reason I ever had the courage to write in the first place. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just Ethan's victory. It was mine too. It was even James's in a way. Because in breaking the cycle of silence that had claimed 2 generations of Wilson men, Ethan had given all our voices meaning. Sometimes legacy isn't what's handed down to you. Sometimes it's what you create from the broken pieces you inherit. Sometimes it's the story you choose to tell when everyone expects you to remain silent. And sometimes the most powerful words are the ones that were never supposed to be spoken at all.